Okay, I think we should get things underway because we've a busy agenda, lots to get through, and hopefully we'd like to keep this to time and get through till midday. Can everybody hear me okay? First of all, can you give me a thumbs up to show you can hear me? Good, lovely. Right, hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar on lighting and the circular economy. Today we're hopefully going to tell you what you need to know about the new regulations, the standards and the commercial requirements for lighting. Recolight has teamed up with the government in the form of Defra's circular economy team, and LightingEurope provide what we hope will be an essential introduction to the changes that will affect you and your business. As we're all aware, this issue is extremely timely and urgent, and it's set to rapidly move from a should do for the environment to a must do for business success. My name is Ray Molony and I'll be your chairman for the next hour or so. Today is actually a precursor or a kicker event to the Recolight one-day circular economy conference that's planned for October. So stay in the loop and keep an eye out for that, whether that's going to be a live event or whether it's going to be online. We don't know yet, but so just keep an eye out for that. That will bring together experts across the industry and explore the commercial opportunities in ending waste and obsolescence for lighting products. Today's webinar is scheduled to end just after midday. It's being recorded and you'll be sent a link to the recording and the slides of the presentations on an email later today. So you want to take any copious notes, I'm sure you'll be very glad about that. Let's take a look at the agenda. We have two officials from, Suzanne, can you help me with the slides? I'm having trouble just moving those on. I don't know what the problem with that is. So we have we're kicking off with an overview of Defra's strategic aims for the circular economy. James Butterworth, who is the circular economy team at Defra, will give us a kind of overview, while Matthew Stocks, who's with the WEEE regulations, product regulation and producer responsibility team, he will focus more on the WEEE regulations review that's recently happened. Ourania Georgoutsakou, who's the Secretary General of LightingEurope, will look at the EU laws and policies and general direction of travel on sustainability and how that's impacting us on the lighting industry. Next, Nigel Harvey, the CEO of Recolight, will look at the impacts that the waste directive, WEEE regulations, waste packaging and battery legislation is having and will have on us again in the lighting industry. And finally, I will have a quick run through some of the real world initiatives and actions that are going around the industry of people adopting circular economy principles, reduce, reuse and recycling. And as I say, I'll be your chairman for today. So just a couple of housekeeping points. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box at the bottom right. And if you don't see it, you may have to play around with some of your view options or your view drop-down menu and pick that up. Now that is where you can pop in a question at any time during the presentations. And when all the presentations are over, we will go through them and attempt to answer as many as possible. If we don't get around to all of them today, we'll try and answer them. The speakers will try and answer them afterwards. There's also a chat box in the middle at the bottom. And if you have any issues, you problems with your sound, or you've got some questions that are not related to the subject matter of today, just pop them in there and my colleague Suzanne will endeavor to assist you on that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to James Butterworth for our first presentation.
Hopefully everyone can hear me now. Marvelous. Thanks. Thank you very much, Ray, for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. As introduced, I'm James Butterworth, and I work in the circular economy policy team in Defra. I work with Maya D'Souza, who many of you may have encountered or met before. So we make up the circular economy team, and then as Ray mentioned before, Matt is more focused on WEEE regulations, and he's going to be talking a little bit after me. So as Ray has said, what I intend to do with the next sort of 10 minutes or so is give a little bit of a background as to government strategy over the past few years, where we've come from, where we're at now, what sort of general direction of travel there is in respect of circular economy, and the means that we are currently using to get there. So this first slide just covers some recent government commitments, which many of you may already be familiar with to some extent. So the industrial strategy published a couple of years ago was amongst many commitments and laying down of plans and strategic ambition. We confirmed the ambition to double resource productivity and to eliminate avoidable waste by 2050. At a similar sort of time, the 25-year environment plan was published, and again, the commitment to double resource productivity and work towards zero avoidable waste by 2050 was confirmed. And of course, the very well-known line that the government pledged to improve the environment within a generation. We followed those publications with the resources and waste strategy, which obviously, as the title suggests, has specific focus on waste, on the waste side of things, and also on effective management of our resources. And that was the blueprint for the commitments just mentioned. We set down how we want to promote resource efficiency and move towards a more circular economy and away from the linear model of make, take, throw away. Once again, in June 2019, the government committed again to a legally binding target of net zero emissions by 2050. Just waiting for the slide to move on. Suzanne, oh, there we go. Okay, so looking specifically at the 25-year environment plan in a little bit more detail, and this pledge to leave the environment in a better condition for the next generation. Part of that is about prolonging the lives of the materials and the goods that we use, so keeping things in use for longer, looking to manufacture things that are more durable, that can be more easily repaired and potentially can be remanufactured as well. Suzanne, if you're able to move the slide on, that would be fantastic. Okay, that's great. So the resources and waste strategy set down 5 strategic ambitions to be delivered over its lifetime, and these are noted down here. So number 1, working towards all plastic packaging being placed on the market being recyclable, reusable or compostable by 2025, eliminating food waste to landfill by 2030, eliminating avoidable plastic waste over the lifetime of the 25-year environment plan, doubling resource productivity by 2050, and eliminating avoidable waste of all kinds by 2050. And that was underpinned by 100 detailed commitments designed to achieve those ambitions. So the key actions that have been taken since the publication of the resources and waste strategy, we're ensuring that producers pay the full net costs of disposal or recycling of packaging that they place on the market by extending producer responsibility. And that's going to be using powers that we're seeking in the Environment Bill, which I'll come to in a few moments. Looking to introduce a deposit return scheme for drinks bottles, to increase recycling of single-use containers and disposable cups filled at the point of sale, setting a consistent range of recyclable materials which will be collected. This is something that's been called out for by stakeholders for some time, giving that consistency so that consumers know what they can recycle, where they can recycle it, and what they need to do to make sure it goes to the right place. We're going to review producer responsibility schemes for other items that can be harder or more costly to recycle, and that could include cars, some electrical goods, and also batteries. Potentially extending producer responsibility to other product groups, including textiles, fishing gear, vehicle tyres, and certain other materials from construction and demolition, and potentially bulky waste such as mattresses, furniture, and carpets. And then the bit that Matt's going to talk to you about in a few moments, reviewing regimes on batteries and WEEE by the end of 2020. As you may be aware, there have been a number of public consultations in the last year or so, and those have included extended producer responsibility for packaging, the DRS scheme for drinks containers, consistent recycling collections, and also, although this is HMT-led as opposed to Defra, the plastic packaging tax. These all closed. These all closed in May last year, giving us the platform from which to deliver our strategic ambitions. And we're now seeking powers in the Environment Bill to provide the legislative framework to realise those ambitions. You know, the text at the bottom, given the current situation with COVID-19, a lot of this work has been put on pause, and I will come to that and the impact of that pause on the Environment Bill in just a moment. There's a little bit more detail on the next slide about the extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging. So that's going to transform the way packaging collection is funded, and it could cover collection and transportation, treating and disposing of any packaging from that ends up in the residual waste stream, providing information to consumers about recycling and anti-littering, and also helping with the cleanup of littered and fly-tipped packaging. The expectation here is that this will result in higher quality, better value for money, and a more efficient and effective service, delivering better quality recyclate to processors. Little note in the bottom right there on the plastic packaging tax. So from 2022, there's going to be a world-leading tax with less than 30% on plastic packaging with less than 30% recycled plastic. And the budget this year set the rate at £200 per tonne. A few extra details about consistency in recycling collections, the fact that we're going to designate a core set of materials to include paper and card glass, plastic pots, tubs and trays, and metal packaging, and that we're looking to legislate from 2023. And separate food waste collections will also be included, again, from 2023. So the powers that we need to bring all this to life, many of which are set out in the Environment Bill. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, the Environment Bill was reintroduced in January, it passed second reading on the 26th of Feb. It was in committee stage when the COVID crisis basically prevented us from continuing the bill's passage through Parliament and through the Lords. But that is going to resume, and we're expecting that to be before not too very long. And so we remain hopeful that royal assent may be achieved by the end of the year, but that's very much to be confirmed, depending on what happens over the coming months. So there's a number of powers in the Environment Bill, and the powers that I'm particularly involved with are those relating to eco-design and eco-labelling. Of course, lighting is covered by eco-design regulation that was already in existence and will be retained in UK law at the end of the transition period. In terms of the powers that we're seeking in the Environment Bill, the eco-design power will cover non-energy related products, and the consumer information or eco-labelling power will cover all products, whether energy related or non-energy related. In respect of our circular economy plans, we're going to be working very closely with BEIS over the coming years on their use of the eco-design powers in the future. In particular, there's going to be a call for evidence in the very near future. We're not quite sure of the publication date yet, again for the COVID-19 reasons mentioned before. but that is going to be specifically looking for evidence and feedback from stakeholders such as yourselves on where we think we should be going in terms of resource efficiency and the wider piece on material efficiency beyond simply energy efficiency, and the kinds of uses that eco-design powers have had thus far. So why should we focus on resource efficiency? I guess everyone is likely to have a good idea as to what the answers to that question already, but of course, this is about protecting natural capital from unnecessary extraction, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing our resource security, looking to provide extra jobs and growth and improve productivity by developing a bigger reuse, repair and remanufacturing sector. There's huge public support for this, as it states down the bottom there. 87% of the public see a strong or very strong need to shift to a society that uses resources more efficiently. And achieving resource efficiency through a circular economy is very much about a holistic approach. There isn't one single set of actions that can be taken. So this is about looking to the technology and materials that are used in production, looking at the business models that are used to distribute products, looking at the economic impacts, which includes GDP, productivity and jobs, examining the regulatory frameworks that govern production and consumption, looking at behaviors, particularly around our consumption patterns, making sure that we're measuring and monitoring as much information as we possibly can to understand what's happening, and communicating the benefits of a more circular economy. So we see a variety of challenges associated with production, consumption and end of life. So in terms of production, we see the means to overcoming those challenges centering on the design of products, the materials that are used, the manufacturing and production processes that are used to make those products, and then the way in which those products are distributed. In terms of consumption, we're looking at what we can do around purchasing decisions and making sure that consumers have all the information that they need to make the most sustainable purchasing decisions, and then the way in which they use those products and the attitude that is taken to how long those products should be in use before they are disposed or before they go on to their next use. And then of course what happens to those products at the end of their life, and how able we are to recover critical materials from those products. And then end of life, we have challenges focused around collection, making sure that as much of these materials and items get back into stay in use or continue to hold their value, the way in which those products are treated and reprocessed, information and availability of information relating to the contents of products to enable them to be recycled or remanufactured, and also simplifying what happens at the end of life. And then lastly, just to mention the waste prevention program. This is we've reached the end of the 6-year cycle of the waste prevention program, and we'll shortly be publishing the review of that 6-year cycle. We're now currently working on the next iteration of the waste prevention program, which contains some cross-cutting themes across eco-design, eco-labeling. The intention is to look at a variety of sectors, which are noted down the bottom. That does include construction, textiles, vehicles, electronics, furniture, food and plastics. This isn't confirmed yet. This is very much a work in progress, but keep an eye out for information on the waste prevention program later in the year. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Matt, who's going to talk a little about the WEEE review.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you very much for having me. So I am Matthew Stocks, and I am a policy advisor in the product regulation and producer responsibility team at Defra. So I work with Graham Vickery, who I'm sure some of you may have come across. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the forthcoming consultation that we're developing at the moment on the review of the WEEE regulations. So in the resources and waste strategy, we made a commitment to review or consult on reviewing the WEEE regulations. And we've indicated that the review is going to focus on a few key areas. So the first area we're going to look at is looking at ways that we can increase collections of WEEE. To do this, we might look at, for example, systemic changes that could be made, including reviewing the existing target setting and compliance fee mechanisms to ensure that they're fit for purpose, as well as looking at the current collection network and ensuring that that's sort of sufficient, or if there needs to be sort of further extension of retailer obligations or, for example, doorstep collections to improve that sort of availability of collection points for householders. We'll also, alongside this, it's worth noting that we'll be supporting a behaviour change campaign that's led by Material Change, who manage the WEEE Compliance Fee Fund. And we believe that sort of campaign, obviously it's had to be unfortunately delayed due to the coronavirus outbreak. But when it gets underway, we think that will have a really good impact in terms of increasing public awareness of how they can reuse and recycle their electronics and electrical equipment. And that, in sort of conjunction with our policies, should lead to a real substantial increase in collections over the next few years. We'll also be looking at ways that we can encourage more reuse of functional E. Obviously, we are trying to make sure that the WEEE regulations are compatible with the sort of circular economy ambitions that James talked about earlier, and trying to move things up the waste hierarchy. So obviously, although the WEEE regulations is a system for, you know, when electronic goods become waste and managing that, we do want to sort of try and find ways that we can sort of look at the regulations as a way of preventing electronics from becoming waste in the first place. We'll also be working closely with online platforms and our extended producer responsibility team within Defra to develop a proposal to ensure that online platforms are also fulfilling their producer responsibility obligations, creating a sort of a more level playing field across all producers. We think this is really important, particularly at the moment, because obviously with the coronavirus outbreak, and I think it was a trend anyway, regardless of the outbreak, but we're clearly seeing a massive increase in online sales. So I think it's extremely important that we sort of go and explore that issue in the future. We'll also be wanting to ensure alignment with the broader EPR framework. As James talked about earlier, clearly there's a lot of EPR reforms going on within Defra at the moment, and we want to ensure that the principles that we sort of embed into the WEEE regulations are consistent with those broader principles in the EPR framework. So that includes things like ensuring that producers are bearing the full net cost of managing their products at the end of the life. And the last thing we're also going to have a look at is how we can use the WEEE regulations to encourage more sustainable design and production of products and electronic goods. And one of the ways that we'll look at is through using modulated fees. So as you may all know, modulated fees are sort of used to encourage producers to more, sustainably design their products in line with the waste hierarchy. And the way that this would happen is that producers who do design their products with these sort of principles in mind may be rewarded with a sort of a lower compliance cost, but those who do not design it in this way may sort of face a financial penalty. So there's that kind of inbuilt financial incentive for producers to really go above and beyond and design their products more sustainably. Obviously, to do that, we'll need to make sure that we're joined up with the circular economy team in Defra and James's work, but also look at BEIS's eco-design for energy using products team as well, because clearly they sort of own the government policy on eco-design, and we know that there are existing eco-design regulations for lighting. So any work that we do, for example, on lighting, will need to be sort of joined up with that. Okay, and possibly next slide, please, James. So we sort of see the review taking place over a number of sort of key distinct phases. So we're sort of in phase 1 at the moment of the review, which is developing policy proposals. And the way we're doing that is through some stakeholder engagement. So we're doing some workshops, we're developing some pre-consultation papers to sort of get feedback from stakeholders. Clearly in the WEEE system, there are a very diverse range of stakeholders with a diverse range of interests. So it's really important that as we go through this process that we're really engaging and hearing all the different voices within the WEEE community, everyone from compliance schemes to producers to trade associations to local authorities, all who are impacted and have obligations under the regulations and will need to be consulted with as we review them. Once we have a more sort of some robust policy proposals, phase 2 we'll sort of have a look at drafting an impact assessment, looking at the sort of socio-economic costs and benefits of those policies. And then finally, we'll go through the sort of publication and clearance processes within government, and there will be the consultation document will be published, and that will be sort of go around for the sort of standard 12-week consultation period. Obviously, because of the coronavirus pandemic and the sort of impacts of that on internal resources and also just stakeholder capacity as well to sort of engage in the process, we're having to keep the timescales sort of under review for this. So that will be something that we will update all stakeholders on as and when we sort of get a more exact time scale. But the key thing to note is that we're currently sort of in the phase 1 of the stakeholder engagement. We are going to be running some more workshop activities over the next sort of couple of months, focusing on the areas that I mentioned earlier. So looking at increasing collections, encouraging reuse, and that sort of thing. We did actually have a workshop on eco-modulation with a group of producers, and Nigel Harvey actually attended that workshop, and that got some really good conversation going about how eco-modulation could be used in the WEEE system, and the sort of linkages with the eco-design regulations, and the sort of broader work on eco-labelling that James mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of work going on, but we're sort of at the policy development proposal phase. Yeah, we sort of, you know, we'd really welcome anyone to sort of come and, you know, feed in ideas through while we're in this phase. I think that was all really from me, but I just want to say thanks again to Suzanne for organising it, and for Recolight just for having me along. And yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or good morning from your side. Good afternoon where I'm sitting, to everybody as well. My name is Ourania. I'm the Secretary General of LightingEurope, and I'm trying to manage the slides, which are a bit on the sensitive side, but there we go. Quickly, in case you don't know LightingEurope, we're a trade association based in Brussels, sunshine today. We represent the manufacturers of lighting products, so the people who make lamps, luminaires, and the components that go in those products. And our membership is a mix of national associations representing lighting manufacturers, such as the LIA in the UK, and companies that are directly members in our organization. The industry set out a vision back in 2015 about how to deliver value for people and also value for the industry. And we saw 4 lines of direction where we could deliver: lidification and the energy savings, sustainability, and then intelligence and human-centric lighting. We reviewed our roadmap in 2019, confirmed we are still on track. It's the industry's view that we've made really good progress on lidification and on sustainability. And the main potential now lies with the intelligent lighting systems and with the human-centric lighting. And what we do note is we need to reinforce the regulatory framework in which we operate in Europe. There's a lot of rules out there. They're not always easy to understand, and they're not always easy to enforce. And sometimes market surveillance authorities don't have the resources or the expertise to enforce those rules. So we're looking really for a healthy regulatory environment to underpin our vision. I've been asked to give you a view of what's coming out of Europe in terms of policies and rules, just to give you a high-level picture of what's coming out of Brussels and what will impact lighting as well. And to do that, I think first it's important to understand the political climate in which we operate in Europe. So we have a new European Commission. They took office in November 2019, last year. They have a 5-year mandate. And as soon as the new Commission President arrived and took office, she published a set of priorities. And you can already see in those priorities, in that document, a clear commitment to making Europe a greener society and a greener economy, with statements such as, let's become the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. Let's be even more ambitious with our targets to reduce emissions by 2030 and bring them up to 55%. and a promise of new rules and policies to support that sustainable vision, in particular a new EU Circular Economy Action Plan that I'll be talking about in a minute, and also the commitment to put some money to back that policy, if you like. So creating more sustainable financing, linking sustainability as conditions for accessing financing under the European Investment Bank or the EU funding programs. And the other big commitment I think we see out of this new commission is digitalization. And that includes a commitment to regulate online sales that I heard the gentleman speaking about earlier. We also have a new European Parliament, and in Europe, decisions are made by Parliament and by the national ministers or the heads of government that meet and discuss and vote on rules. If they're not made by the Commission, they're made by the people we elect to do so. The new Parliament that took office in May last year after elections had a change in the balance of powers, if you like. So both the traditional center-right and center-left parties lost seats. That means they no longer have a majority in the European Parliament to push through decisions. And it means they now need to make a coalition with either the Liberals or the Green Party in particular in order to get things through. And even post-Brexit, when the seats of members of the European Parliament were redistributed, that coalition still needs to happen, and we're waiting for a juicy bit of law to hit the Parliament floor to see who hooks up with whom. But it's clear from discussions, from what we hear coming out of members of the European Parliament, there is a commitment to sustainability and to green requirements across the board. But it's, let's be honest, it's not new, what we're looking at. It started well before. The first example, I think, concrete example of sustainability and circular economy requirements coming out of the EU was an eco-design legislation. We have a new set of EU rules on eco-design and energy labeling that were published in October 2019 and start applying in September 2021. And there you already see a push to sustainability in two ways, I think. First one is by continuing to promote notification and phasing out conventional technologies. So with the new energy efficiency requirements that the new legislation implements, there are a number of conventional products that will no longer be able to be placed on the EU market. So the CFLIs, the T8s, T2s. And that is happening progressively in 2021 and then again in the second wave in 2023. So notification supported by a regulatory push continues. And the other side is that we see that eco-design now becomes an instrument for introducing circular economy requirements. So it goes beyond its traditional remit of energy efficiency to start addressing also sustainability concerns. And in the case of lighting, we saw this, the famous Article 4, which includes, it introduces a requirement that you can remove light sources and separate control gear from a containing product, and I'll get to that in a moment, in order to check that they comply with the eco-design requirements, and that when these light sources and control gear are within a wider product, a luminaire, shall we say, that the user can actually take them out and have them replaced easily. Unless there's a technical justification for that. So a small gateway, if you like, for not satisfying that requirement. And the legislation goes a bit further because it then says, if you can't do that, if you can't remove the light source, and if you can't remove the control gear, if you have, for example, integrated luminaire, then the whole thing needs to comply with the requirements in the eco-design legislation. So there is really a clear incentive towards the lighting market globally to start going in that direction of removable components and replaceability. Now, the new legislation is a bit complicated already because it was an attempt to simplify and combine three pieces of existing legislation into one, and that is never an easy task. And it introduces concepts that we're not familiar with. So we don't talk about lamps and luminaires, we talk about light sources, and we talk about containing products. So LightingEurope has put out a set of guidelines on how to understand and apply the eco-design legislation and the new energy labeling rules that accompany it to your product, and with decision trees and diagrams that help you understand what kind of product do you have and what requirements do you need to apply. So to understand, are you a containing product? Do you satisfy the removability requirement? Do you have a labeling obligation? and also to understand whether you have the obligation to provide information to the user about whether or not the components are replaceable. There is that requirement in the legislation as well. And when you sell a product that contains a light source directly to an end user in its packaging on the shelf, if you like, then you have to use a pictogram, at least, to indicate whether those components are removable. LightingEurope has made available some pictograms to allow you to tell the customer whether the light source is replaceable by a professional or normal user, and the same for the control gear. And all that, like I said, is available online on our website. I think you can have the slides afterwards to find it. Those guidelines are free and available to everybody. They are published, they're dated back to December 2019, and our target is to continuously update them the more we learn and the more things change. So all you need to do is put in an email address, and then you can download those documents. And with your email address, we can alert you when there's a new edition out. And there most likely will be a new edition because we are discussing revisions to these eco-design and labeling rules. So there's actually a meeting next week on the 4th of June to discuss changes to some parts of the legislation, including what is a containing product and therefore a possible impact on the removability requirements as well. So stay tuned to see what happens next on that one. The other big vehicle, if you like, for promoting sustainability is the EU Circular Economy Action Plan that was published earlier this year, just at the start of the corona pandemic. And it's basically a short document, if you think about it, that lists very many possible initiatives that the EU might come up with. And I've tried to group them for you in sort of easy to follow way. The approach is multiple. So they think about requirements on the product that the manufacturer will have to comply with. They're thinking about requirements that would stimulate demand for these new sustainable products among consumers and users. And they think about what kind of financing can I provide or economic incentives I can provide to help both the user and the manufacturer go down the sustainability path. Many of these are just ideas or statements with little detail behind them, and so feel free to ask the question if we know more, and I'm afraid that maybe I don't. For some, I'd also like to learn more, so we'll have to wait and see for some of these. So if we start off with the sustainable product element of things, there's a clear commitment in this action plan to improve durability of products, reusability, upgradability, repairability, to address the presence of hazardous substances, increase energy efficiency, enable remanufacturing, enable recycling, reduce the environmental footprint, limit the use of, already limit the premature obsolescence and these short life products, and sort of incentivize also products as a service. Now, lighting is interesting in this context. So these are overarching principles, and what will be interesting to see moving forward is how these are applied vertically, product for product, because, for example, in the case of lighting, with LEDs, we're doing quite well with durability and lifetime, and that would be a requirement that we could have already satisfied if that's the path we take. I also have to raise the question about how we make rules that are easy to enforce when it happens, when the time comes. We've seen a requirement in eco-design, I think, for dishwashers or refrigerators that says that you need to demonstrate access to spare parts for 10 years on the day of placing on the market. And every time I meet someone from the European Commission, I ask them, how do I prove that? How do I, on day one, show you that in 10 years' time, you will have access to that spare part? The intention is correct. The way to enforce it, though, is still not clear, and nobody's given me an answer to that. So what I find challenging in all the sustainability discussion moving forward, and as we start to regulate, is to find that balance between a very good objective and a very practical, pragmatic way to make sure everybody complies and delivers the sustainability and the value we are looking for. Another big element is really reducing the amount of hazardous substances in the environment, starting already at design, so trying to limit and restrict substances in products. We see that in the case of lighting with the RoHS exemptions. We are still awaiting a commission decision on the 2015 applications that LightingEurope submitted to renew mercury and lead exemptions for lamps. That still has not come out yet. And that means that the timetable that I showed you earlier under eco-design can still be changed if the commission decides to put forward a different timetable under ROS. So that still remains to be seen. But there is clearly an ambition to minimize the amount of substances already at product design level, and then to find a good way of informing people down the value chain to the consumer so that they can make the educated choice, if that choice is available, to choose a product with less harmful substances, and also at end of life to the recycler to be able to handle those substances safely and to extract as much quality secondary raw materials as possible. We expect the chemical strategy to come out in early September. I think that timetable has still not changed, so we'll hear more about what to see there. I think one big push is really this information system and this idea of providing information through the value chain to everybody at each step. We see that with a lot of information and reporting requirements referred to in the action plan. So there's talk about tagging, labeling, watermarks, providing product environmental footprints, making that possibly mandatory, or promoting organization environmental footprints also. Again, interesting to see how those will be applied on the product specific view, because there must be some kind of value and some kind of incentive both to the manufacturer and to the user to change that the behavior when you do these kinds of requirements. So for example, for a product environmental footprint, in the case of lighting, the biggest impact is during the use stage, and we're addressing that under energy efficiency requirements. So interesting to see how we move along there. I also note the proliferation of electronic information requirements. It feels to me sometimes that this is the way we're implementing the digital agenda of Europe in the case of sustainability, by creating more digital information requirements. We already have a labeling database. So EPRO is where you need to put information on your energy label before placing a product on the market. We're talking now about creating a European circular data space. I'm not really sure what that would include at this stage. I don't think anybody knows what it would include at this stage. We're thinking about moving forward with a digital product passport. And the one element I think that we've all seen coming through, which is probably the most challenging one in terms of policy terms, is SKIP, and this new database on substances of high concern. It's a database that was created under the waste legislation, and its intention is to require manufacturers to provide the information they have to provide under Article 33 of REACH, all the way down to the waste phase. So what do you have to do? Normally, as a manufacturer, every person in the value chain has to be able to tell the next person in that chain whether their product contains certain substances that are regulated under REACH, and how to safely use that article. And that means at least the name of the substance, and maybe you need to tell someone, please handle with gloves, please ventilate the area, or wear masks, that kind of thing. The challenge now is that we are creating a database. So it is still in prototype phase. It's available for anybody to test, I understand, as we speak. And the legal obligation to upload all information, all substances of very high concern, and all components of your product starts on the 5th of January 2021. This is a requirement that still needs to be legislated at national level, so you still need a national piece of law to say this is now an obligation and you have to do this. So the requirement exists in a directive at European level. To make it a requirement on a manufacturer, you need that national legislation as well. And frankly, it's a case of a great ambition, a great idea, in my personal opinion, I have to tell you, but a very poor execution plan. So this idea for a database came up after midnight, I understand, between and when the Parliament and the Member States were negotiating this waste legislation. It has never been impact assessed. It has a budget in total of under €1 million for this kind of database. And we are talking about billions and billions of entries of components of products in a data space. So a very ambitious timetable and a very ambitious project, which has great value. The principle of knowing everything about everything is a good principle. the way of getting there is what I find a bit challenging. And I think that's the kind of challenge we need to keep in mind as we move forward in implementing sustainability. Like I said, we're looking also to encourage consumers to make the right choices. So we will be revising consumer legislation, giving people a right to repair, exploring whether guarantees can help people make sure they get the product, the sustainable product they want. There's also discussion about maybe making some minimum mandatory requirements for procuring sustainable products in sectoral legislation, so green public procurement. Really looking to encourage the buyer, the user, to also choose something sustainable. And finally, the last element, an important element, of course, is to also push business to think in a more sustainable way in terms of perhaps environmental accounting principles, further disclosure of environmental data by companies, but also refocusing the European semester, so the economic alignment among member states to include sustainability parameters, KPIs in that discussion, reviewing state aid guidelines for environment and energy, and also things like environmental taxation. We've heard earlier about eco-modulation, and I think Nigel will be talking about that as well. So looking at how to incentivize, from a financial perspective, both companies and users to choose sustainable. Now, that's what was planned, and now let's keep things in context, and that is that COVID happened and everybody sort of had to stop. In the EU, what we see coming out is only COVID-related legislation and policy for the past couple of months, and that's absolutely normal when you deal with an emergency. So the timetable is now a question mark, and the priorities are also a question mark. First of all, from a practical point of view, while the people in the European Commission, like you and me, continue to type from home, it cannot be that suddenly an avalanche of proposals is let loose in July and we all cancel summer and start making new laws. So we will need to space out, I hope, any upcoming proposals to adjust to this new timetable. We also have to accept the fact that this crisis has had an impact on companies. There's a lot of people who've been furloughed. There's labs that have been closed, testing that's delayed. So we will need to think about what the right timetable is for everybody to catch up with the new legislation and with the existing requirements, industry, market surveillance authorities, regulators, and find that right pace to make sure that everybody can comply in time. There's a big concern in Brussels, at least, about how industry might use this COVID pandemic as an excuse to not go green, or how regulators might avoid that. The commitment remains strong, at least in what is heard in Brussels. I can confirm that the commitment remains strong from LightingEurope as well, but the timetable and making a good balance between what is possible and when is, I think, the most important thing. So managing our ambitions to what is a realistic timetable to achieve those ambitions. And of course, we can't forget that in the case of lighting, bottom line, what we're looking for is amazing lighting for people to live in. Especially now that we were all locked up, I think we understood that a way bit better. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ourania. In this final section, I'm going to talk through some of the elements of the legislation that were being considered by James and Matt and show how they might impact on the lighting industry. And the first area to look at is the waste packaging legislation that James mentioned. You may have heard James mention the concept of full net cost recovery, and to understand what that might how that might affect us, it's important to understand that when any of us receive a collection of waste recyclables from our curbside, our doorstep, most of the cost of that collection at the moment is financed by local authorities. And so by talking about full net cost recovery from producers, there's quite a big transfer of financing responsibility from local authorities to producers, which will result in quite a significant increase in producer costs of the packaging compliance, probably up to a 10-fold increase in cost, so a really significant increase. There might also be a change in the de minimis. At the moment, if you're a smaller company who uses less than 50 tons of packaging, then there is no requirement for you to comply. Given the fact that larger companies may be getting such a big increase in their costs, it seems reasonable that that de minimis gets reduced or even eliminated. So a much larger number of companies might be required to pay their fair share of the packaging recycling costs. There are also proposals in those draft regulations that were consulted on last year for incentives for producers to use recyclable packaging using a method known as eco-modulation. I'll mention more about that in a moment. But also the corollary to that is penalties for hard to recycle packaging, products like polystyrene, composite materials, and others. There are also proposals that producers of equipment, producers of packaging that would have to finance national consumer awareness campaigns. That's good because obviously it means we're all told how to manage our waste effectively and where to recycle, but it will add further to costs for producers. And there are also proposals about financing the costs of littering, as James mentioned. And that is somewhat controversial because obviously littering is an illegal act. And to ask producers to pay for the costs of an illegal act seems challenging, but one can understand the logic as well. Also recommendations for recyclability labeling requirements of packaging. So packaging would say if the packaging itself is recyclable. It's important to notice that although most of the changes being discussed would apply principally to producers of consumer products, there will also be changes for those companies that sell business to business products because the government is committed to making it easier both for consumers to recycle, but also for businesses to recycle where they're receiving products that are packaged. The commitment that we heard that free riding through online marketplaces is going to be tackled is so important because there really is a pandemic level of non-compliant product being sold through online marketplaces. We did a study last year and we found that 78% of LED light bulbs being sold through one online marketplace in the UK were not compliant with the WEEE regulations. If they're not compliant with WEEE, they're probably not compliant with packaging, safety may be an issue, RoHS, REACH, etc. And so addressing that as a matter of urgency is really important, particularly, as Matt said, given the huge increase in online sales through marketplaces as a result of the COVID crisis. So moving on from the packaging regulations, I thought it would be useful to have a look at one other change suggested. This is this concept of eco-modulation. And the principle works like this, that if you can make the WEEE costs for environmentally bad products higher, but make the WEEE costs for environmentally good products lower, then you should be able to incentivize producers and purchasers to buy more of the good product and less of the bad product. It's important to note that there would be a need, that there is an additional administrative burden on producers because they need to record the weight of the good products and the bad products separately so that the different fees can apply to both. So how might that work? Because obviously the criteria to decide whether something is environmentally good or environmentally bad are absolutely critical to making this work. And the examples we're going to run through now are very largely taken from a piece of work that was done for both Defra and in fact separately by the same organisation for the Commission. So these are sitting in the inbox of the European Commission and of Defra, and so there is a reasonable chance that one or more of these may make it through onto legislation in the UK. We've heard from Ourania already that luminaires with replaceable light sources are becoming required, but it might be that where luminaires don't have replaceable light sources, there might be an extra WEEE charge applied. Likewise, you might get a lower WEEE charge for products that contain a minimum content of plastic of recycled origin. And that actually makes sense. You know, we as an organisation recycle at the moment a huge amount of lamps and luminaires. they contain plastic. If that recycled plastic isn't being used to make new products, you could argue, what is the point of us doing that recycling? So challenging as it is, and whether this is the right tool to use, plastic tax is an alternative, mandatory standards is another alternative, there is some logic at least in finding a way of encouraging greater use of plastic of recycled origin in products. Other areas which might attract a reduced WEEE fee include extended warranty periods, better battery life, availability of spare parts, products that are easier to disassemble and repair, and indeed products that have hazardous substances below legal thresholds. Now, these are obviously all it's sort of criteria that really affect individual lighting producers. And so there are undoubtedly a number of issues, and we've had a discussion with a number of lighting producers already, and we'll be asking more of our members about what the issues related to those might be. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving the slide, Suzanne. Could you? Lovely, thank you very much. The first of those concerns that a number of people have raised is the need for internationally consistent modulation criteria. Clearly, we are now in Brexit Britain, but it would be particularly challenging if we had a situation in which the eco-modulation criteria adopted in the UK were different from, or even at odds with, eco-modulation criteria adopted at a European level or in other trading blocs. It's going to be important to avoid conflicts with eco-design requirements. You don't want eco-design to drive you in one direction and eco-modulation to drive you in another direction. And indeed what would probably be best is to not eco-modulate where there are eco-design requirements in place already. An important question to ask is, will the difference in the fees really be sufficient to influence change in producers or change in purchasers? Will it result in more good products being bought and fewer bad products being bought? Or could the costs of the additional administrative requirements have quite remove some of the benefits? And a final one to mention is that Defra do have an eco-modulation label under consideration at the moment. We're all aware of energy efficiency labelling, and some would argue that it's actually worked quite well when used for fridges and freezers, and perhaps that has really encouraged purchasers to make sure that they buy environmentally good products which are more energy efficient. So the argument goes, well, if that has driven better purchase of better products, could the same work by identifying those products which are in eco-modulation terms good? If purchasers were aware of those good products, would they be encouraged to buy them, irrespective of the eco-modulation changes in costs? So clearly a number of producers have very considerable concerns about adding an extra label to an already crowded product and an already crowded packaging. But it's worth bearing in mind that this additional labelling is certainly under consideration at Defra at the moment. So that's a very quick review of the ways in which some of those suggested changes might impact the lighting industry.
Thank you, Nigel. I am the last presentation today, and I'm going to go as fast as I can. And we will take questions probably till about, say, 12:15, 12:20 or so. So stay on if you have any questions after this presentation. Suzanne asked me to talk about industry initiatives around the lighting sector, and I've grouped these under the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra. Suzanne, if you could move the slide on, that'd be great. And I think it's a great mantra. I think it's still really useful. I know it's kind of gone out of fashion among the eco sector, but I think it concentrates the mind. And one thing they never talked about was that it is in that order. You reduce first, then you reuse, then you recycle. The coffee cup is a good example, and we should all be drinking using reusable coffee cups. This one's actually made from recycled paper coffee cups. Now, to me, if the circular economy is about anything, it is about us consuming sustainably, and this is a great example of that. However, when it comes to lighting and luminaires, it's way more challenging. We've lots of components. The main ones are steel, aluminium, polycarbonate, acrylic, but there's lots of others, some of which are difficult to disassemble, difficult to separate, and difficult to recycle. So the challenge is clearly to reduce the bill of materials, to the number of SKUs and the inventory. And some companies have made a decent stab at simplifying the illumination of a building. This is Via Buccino's amp fitting. And if you just hold it there, Suzanne, for a minute, they managed to light a whole building with this just one luminaire by having interchangeable optics, so they could change the optics whether it was a corridor or a wide space, etc. It uses the same body, whether it's recessed or whether it's surface mounted. It's just the clamping system is different, and it's all designed to be separable and recyclable. And the next company that is doing something interesting. This is the installation at Amore Pacific in Seoul in Korea, all again done with the one light fitting. Sylvania were due to unveil what they're terming a proper circular economy range. They were going to do that at Frankfurt. It still hasn't dropped yet. I'm not allowed to show you any pictures, and I noticed some participants from Sylvania online to keep an eye that I don't do that. And I believe that Simon Fisher of FMark will present on this hopefully in October and give us more detail about this range. But what's significant is that, you know, Sylvania are a big mainstream player, and for them to put this commitment behind a dedicated range is very significant to my mind. Another interesting development is Signify, and at their Meheisha factory in the Netherlands, they have installed a line of 3D printers, and they are going to, and I'm going to try and play this video, and it's not quite working, so I don't know what's happened there. So their policy is to print luminaires on demand, and they're hailing this as, oh, there you go, it's juddering along. So basically what it's there, it's printing a decorative luminaire, and I could just move on, you'll be able to see that in situ. So they aim to have eventually 500 3D printers of different sizes with the ability to create luminaires of up to 60 centimeters in height and width. And here is a cluster at the Albert Heijn supermarket in the Netherlands, and they're using recyclable polycarbonate materials, which allows the luminaires to be bespoke, designed, and tailored to customers' needs. It's not just decorative luminaires that can be 3D printed, architectural fittings too. If we just move on to the next slide, Suzanne, please. So these spotlights have been 3D printed, and Marks and Spencer's are become the first customer for these, and they are already installed in the Manchester branch of Marks and Spencer's. There they are, but they're also going to be installed in London, Belfast, Dublin, and Cork as well. So obviously that's you have a client there that's very sustainably focused, and you can see other clients following suit. Signify is the only company working at scale with 3D, but there's lots of little companies producing decorative stuff. And I just thought I'd put this up as an example of what you can do with 3D printing. This is from Lisa Pittner. Reuse, not a lot of reuse going on in the lighting industry, reuse of lighting products, sadly. It's difficult, the high bays like this, old school, difficult to reuse, obviously. And if we can extract the materials and get that to the waste stream, that is a bonus. If we could, Suzanne, if you could just spin us through. Here, this is Varday, which is a hedge fund in the City of London. When they moved, they took their previous luminaires with them and had them reinstalled. It's a small example to show that it does happen, but it's not as common as we would hope, really. We also see, here's a classic example of reuse with these, the old industrial luminaires, are very fashionable in bars and restaurants and hospitality. This is the Brewdog brew pub in Nice in France, and they use these refurbed industrial light fittings that come from a company called Skinflint in Cornwall. Chris Miller is the head guy at Skinflint. Can we just move on to the next slide, please, Suzanne? And this company, interestingly, they've introduced a buyback service. So basically, when the bar or pub or restaurant is finished with the luminaires, they will actually buy the fittings back at a certain residual value and refurb, test, and then put back on the market. I think you can't really get more circular than that, really. So there you go. And the next slide. Yeah, I don't know how common this slide is, but I just thought that this was one that Chris had in one of his presentations, and it just shows you, the various. It's a sophisticated iteration on the reduce, reuse, recycle. And obviously the smaller the loop, the better it is. This is the Relit initiative, which is set up by Michael Grubb, lighting design practice. And this is where they take superseded product lines, old samples, demonstration kit, and products with outdated LED lamps, and use them in mainly social initiatives and projects. So if we go to the next slide, this is the Handlebar Cafe in Winchester, which was a social enterprise set up by a group of local teenagers. And the Relit persuaded Igazzini, LED Linear, Optelma, and others to donate pendants and downlights, etc. And there you can see them installed and in use. Similarly, this is Chicken Town, a chicken shop in Tottenham, another social enterprise. Again, the luminaires were donated, installed, etc. and reused. Recycling, a lot of recycling going on, obviously. I'll just give one example. This is Wilco, 82 store rollout, upgrade to LEDs. 100% of the lighting was removed and recycled, amounting to 30 tons. So I thought that was really impressive. But they're not alone by any means. It's not unusual, but again, it's not universal. And an honourable mention also to Dextraco, which is a sister company to Dextra Lighting, which has become an approved, authorised treatment facility for end-of-life lighting under the Environment Agency initiative. And all the collections made by Dextra Group are on a backload. This is a smart lamp made by a German company called Karus, and it is 100% recyclable and dismountable, which means you can basically take the bits with your hands, and each element can go back into the waste stream. And I thought that was interesting to see, a light fitting made with no adhesives and no nasties in an attempt to minimize the component count. So that's it from me. We're now going to take some questions. So if I could ask the panelists to unmute themselves and join us, we'll attempt to, next 10-15 minutes, we'll attempt to get through as many questions and comments, etc., as we can, but there is a lot, and so do bear in mind. But any question that we don't get around to today, we will attempt to answer in the fullness of time and on email. First one is from Kevin Shaw, well-known lighting designer. And he says, we need guidance of design life of lighting products. At the moment, we get 5-year guarantees, but LED life claims are 50,000 hours or more. This equates to 15 to 20 years service life, but will the fitting materials of the gear, etc., match these life expectations? To be circular, we need to be able to make decisions on the reuse of existing installed or potential second-hand equipment and be supported with parts and service on fittings well beyond the 5-year guaranteed period. So who'd like to take that on? Nigel.
I was thinking Rania actually, but
okay.
no.
Well, come to Rania afterwards.
But Kevin's absolutely right. It's really difficult because you have very long life LED products, and yet so a 50,000 hour claim is always going to be far longer than most lifetimes that you'd have a warranty for, and maybe the suggestions of eco-modulation, of sort of longer warranties, might have some merit from Defra, that actually if you do give a warranty that's significantly longer than others, maybe you should get a bonus criterion for that.
Rania, did you want to come in on that?
Thank you. I would agree, it's a challenge. And I think one of the most challenging things I find here in Brussels is that when I discuss with policy officers, it seems that legislation is driven by the humble desk lamp, and there's little understanding about the variety of applications of lighting and different requirements these applications satisfy. So yes, we could continue to improve how we communicate. Yes, warranties are a solution, and for some applications you get warranties for up to 15, 18 years. The question then is that enforceable, and how do you prove a warranty on day one? And the bottom line is that, and I think Kevin, you mentioned that somewhere in the chat as I was going through, is that people need to ask that. Building owners need to ask for that kind of product. And then there's a question earlier up, and I think this is what it all comes down to for lighting, and that's why I also mentioned it in my last slide. In the end, we're thinking about what kind of lighting we want in a specific space, and that will evolve over time. So circularity and sustainability is also about thinking about always having the right light over time and as people and needs change. And that would also mean the right components, the right elements that we can change to upgrade, whether it's software or physical components. So yes, we could do more, and legislation doesn't really target that. That's more business side, I think, of things that drives it. And there's a lot of things happening there.
Thank you, Ourania. Christina Allison is asking, what will eco-labelling be about? Will it be about the materials, the carbon footprint, or only about energy like it is today with a fridge? I think that might be one for you, Matt.
Yep, hi. So essentially, as James was talking about earlier, we're looking at seeking powers in the Environment Bill to be able to set resource efficiency labelling. What we mean by resource efficiency is essentially to do with the product's lifespan and different aspects of the product's life cycle, from its production to how the user actually interacts with the products, and whether it's repairable and there are spare parts available to facilitate that repair, right through to the end of life, and whether or not the product is disassemblable, recyclable, what the materials the product has been made out of, as that will obviously have a bearing on whether or not it can be recycled or not. So it's all sorts of aspects really to do with that. I don't know if James, you wanted to come in with a bit more information.
Yeah, that was that's a good summary, Matt. The eco labeling is, we also refer to it as the consumer information power in the Environment Bill, which, as I mentioned in my presentation, will cover all products, so energy related and non-energy related. And as Matt said, the intention is to widen the scope beyond energy efficiency to include aspects of material efficiency across the whole life cycle. We don't have a working model for what that will look like yet. We're only at the point of seeking the enabling powers in the Environment Bill, and any implementation of that power will be subject to a further extensive evidence gathering exercise and consultation, most likely as well, in order to first of all identify products where introducing a new label, or not necessarily a physical label, but a means of delivering information to consumers to help them make more sustainable purchasing decisions. We'll be looking for the products where there is the most opportunity to benefit the environment, looking at a much more life cycle orientated view beyond just energy efficiency. I hope that answers the question, Christina.
Thank you, James. Participant with the initials AG is asking, with a different fee structure such as the eco-modulation, isn't there a danger of encouraging more non-compliance or avoidance? That's definitely for you, Nigel.
And I would have to agree, unless the eco-modulation criteria are relatively straightforward and simple to audit, then there is a risk of increased fraud. And certainly we as a PCS are involved in actively auditing a number of our participants every year. If it's very difficult for us to go and speak to a producer and verify whether they really have or have not complied with particular criteria, then it becomes a recipe for fraud.
Final quick one for you, Nigel. David North is asking, where are we with Amazon and their blatant disregard for recycling and the fact that they are not charged a WEEE fee?
We are at the situation where enormously frustrating that still the huge level, as I said earlier, the pandemic level of non-compliant product sold through online marketplaces is really damaging compliant businesses in the UK, in Europe, almost wherever the online marketplaces operate, and it's getting worse at the moment. I've had multiple discussions with friends in Defra, and I think they appreciate the urgency with which this really needs to be tackled. It can't wait until 2023 when a lot of this other legislation is going to come into force. There really is a risk that compliant, good lighting businesses operating now will cease trading because of the growth in online non-compliance that continues to take place.
Whoa, okay, that's quite...
Sorry, that's fairly,
whoa.
fairly in your face.
Yes, okay, right, we will move straight on. Lawrence Barling is asking, we understand that there will be a UK consultation for the adoption of the new EU single lighting regulations and the new EU energy labelling regulation. Any idea when this will happen, and will there be any deviations from the EU regulations expected? That's for you, Ourania, I would have thought.
I would have thought that hopefully the gentleman from the UK would answer that, because I have the same question. So what was adopted and published last year is, I understand, part of the UK legal system. And I'll add to that question, what happens when we make some changes now, maybe by the end of this year? Will you follow up with them in the UK?
Okay, so thanks Rania, and thanks for the question, Lawrence. There is going to be a consultation on lighting, and my understanding is from it's not a Defra lead, it's a BEIS lead, and so they will be publishing the consultations. These are happening in a kind of phased approach. So I think lighting is going to be along with another product group. I don't recall which one that is, but the intention, I believe, is that consultation will be somewhere around autumn time, and the intention remains that will mean the legislation actually comes into force around about the same time as it does in the EU as well. That's the current plan. Obviously, COVID has been moving things around a little bit. In terms of deviations, again, my understanding is that what we're doing with that package of legislation is consulting on something very similar, if not the same, as the original EU agreed instruments. So I believe the consultation will be on something that is very similar to what's going to come into force in the EU next year.
Okay, thank you, James. Okay, we'll take two more questions and then we'll wrap up. I have a question from a lighting designer, Rohit Manhudain, and he says, is it possible to be part of workshops, WEEE workshops, and is there a platform for sharing ideas with WEEE, and can he be part of it? So is there some sort of platform for these types of discussions?
What we're doing, you're absolutely right. We're sort of setting up some workshops because of the situation with the pandemic. It's likely that they will have to be on a webinar format. But the good thing is about having them on a webinar format is obviously you can have more people attending. So we will consider whether or not we open that up to more people. Generally, we'll just sort of tend to invite select people within the WEEE community. But what we're also going to do after those workshops is develop some papers, just summarising the outcomes of those workshops, which will be sort of published and distributed more widely, so people will have the opportunity to see what the outcomes of those discussions have been and feed in their ideas as well. We also have a WEEE mailbox as well, so Suzanne, maybe you can pass that around to all the sort of participants afterwards, but you can get in touch with us directly via that WEEE mailbox.
And finally, there's quite a pertinent comment, I suppose, from Alan Tulla, who says, how do the speakers propose to persuade government to add extra regulations on business, especially when the intention has to be go flat out for re-stimulating the economy? So it's about, you know, balancing, you know, the costs, you know, will the eco regulations be under pressure to compromise due to the fact that we need to re-stimulate all our economies post-COVID? Ourania, do you have a view on that one?
I share the question. I think that's the big challenge, and I think we'll have to be realistic with our timetable. Again, the skip database is a great example. It's a great idea, and it's a terrible timetable. Getting it wrong will only undermine the credibility of the policies and rules we make. It'll allow non-compliance just to proliferate. People will just keep selling and not complying, and the rest will simply go out of business, as Nigel said earlier. So the timetable is essential, and I personally would advocate for maybe a slight delay, but getting it right.
Okay, unless anybody wanted to come in on that, did anybody else want to come in on that? If not, okay, we'll wrap up there. I think we're going to bring things to a close. Thank you, everyone who has asked questions. There's lots of comments, there's lots of chat as well. If your question hasn't been answered, our speakers will endeavour to get back to you over the next couple of days with their views. On behalf of Recolight, I'd like to thank today's speakers, Rania, Matthew, and James. As I said earlier, today's webinar has been recorded, and you will get a reminder email with a link, and there you will also get access to the presentation slides. If you have a question on webinar topics that was not answered, you can ask a question about WEEE, the battery and the packaging compliance on the email that's on your screen at the moment, which is members@recolight.co.uk. Any questions about Recolight's recycling services, you can email info@recolight.co.uk. Recolight will also keep you posted about future webinars and indeed the conference on lighting and the circular economy, which is due to take place in October. Now, when we exit Zoom after this, you'll see a really short survey, and we'd be very grateful if you could fill it in. Your feedback is really important, and all feedback is read and considered by the team. Thank you all for participating today. It's goodbye from me and the team, and we hope to see you again at one of these events. Thank you and goodbye.